UFC Kansas City betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this weekend. We got the return of Max Holloway. Big slate on DraftKings. I'm excited. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the women's bantamweight division, we have Lucy Kudalaba, minus 135 favorite with the comeback on Jocelyn Edwards is plus 115. And Lucy Kudalaba previously fought in the UFC, didn't go so well. She went back to the regional scene, put together a nice little win streak now. She's won 6 of her last 7 bouts, including her return to the UFC octagon against Wu Yanan, where she ended up winning that fight by second round TKO, but she's not really typically a finishing threat. She's an okay striker, a little bit hittable on the feet. She's not really going to overwhelm you with volume, but she's solid, while the fight plays out at distance. And then lately, what's been encouraging to me is that she's been mixing in the grappling a little bit more. Not that she's this world level grappler, but at the lower levels, if she's going to mix in the takedowns, then I think that could help her out in terms of her round winning ability. Now on the Jocelyn Edwards side, you guys know this. I've never been a Jocelyn Edwards guy. I think she's just a bunch of empty volume. I think she gets credited with way too many significant strikes, considering most of what she's putting out there is not doing any real damage. She's noticeably slowed down in pretty much all of her fights that get extended. I don't think she has good cardio. I do think she could be taken down and controlled as well. And I think that's an interesting dynamic here because Kudalaba might be able to take her down here, but Edwards actually has like a sneaky submission game off of her back. So I'd be worried on the Kudalaba side because she's not the best defensive grappler. Maybe she gets caught in an armbar after taking Edwards down, something like that. I do think I slightly still lean towards Kudalaba just because, again, I've never been an Edwards guy. I think Kudalaba probably has better cardio, a little bit more volume on the feet, maybe mix in the wrestling, but I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of weird grappling exchange where Edwards ends up pulling off the hero submission. But overall, I just don't think it's a fight that I want much exposure to. We got 14 this week on DraftKings, so we can pick and choose our spots wisely, and I don't think this is going to be one of them for me. And next up in the bantamweight division, Gaston Bolanos is a minus 195 favorite, making his UFC debut with the comeback on Aaron Phillips at plus 165. And at first glance, you're like, what are we doing here? We have some dude who's used to fight over in Bellator, not really impressive, early knockout or bust guy, and then Aaron Phillips coming off a long layoff, was never really a superstar prospect to begin with, came back, fought Jack Shore, and now is coming off a huge layoff. So it's kind of like, what are we really doing here? We'll start on the Bolanos side. I mentioned it earlier, this guy's a big knockout early guy or bust. He doesn't have much tools outside of his power. Most of his wins have come by knockout. He's rarely going to a decision. I think he has one fight where he's gone the full 15 minutes. He's just not a guy that I think is a good minute winner. He's landed a bunch of like spinning elbow knockouts, stuff that you can't really bank on to happen at the UFC level. And he's fighting a guy in Aaron Phillips who's historically pretty durable. I know he did kind of quit easy on that choke by Jack Shore, but in terms of if he can take a punch, I think he can. So if Bolanos just tries to blast him for 5 minutes and then cardio dumps, which I think is a pretty decent likelihood here, I don't think that that's going to do well for DraftKings. This one could cruise to a decision. I think there is finishing upside on both sides because the one advantage I see for Phillips, who's generally a pretty slow starter, okay striker, comes from a Taekwondo karate background, but he does have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, and I don't think Bolanos has much grappling. So if Phillips can get in close, make him grapple, especially if he starts to fade, then maybe Phillips can potentially submit him and get him out of there. So that's kind of the angle that I'm going with. But outside of either of these guys finishing, I think it's just one of those ones where it has a wide range of outcomes because I could see a finish scoring really well on either side. But then if Bolanos gasses and Phillips just stays alive but doesn't really put much on him as the fight goes on, then we're looking at one that definitely underperforms as well. So it's one that's not going to be a core piece for me, but I am going to have exposure to both sides across multiple lineups. Next fight up in the women's strawweight division, we have two Dana White's Contender Series graduates between Bruna, Brazil, who's a minus 150 favorite, with Denise Gomes on the comeback at plus 130. And this is actually my first bet of the week. I bet Denise Gomes on the money line at plus 176. I bet her for 2 units. The line has certainly moved in her favor. I'm not sure I expected it to move this much, but I do think what we have here is a competitive kickboxing match for the most part, because Bruna Brazil comes from a high-level striking background. That's basically all she has, is she's a one-dimensional kickboxer. She's got some powerful kicks. We saw that in her Contender Series fight. I actually bet against her on that Contender Series fight because I thought on tape, yeah, she's got the striking a little bit, but pretty underwhelming in terms of her round winning ability. I don't think she puts a ton of volume out there, and she's not really going to look to grapple much. I know she was able to land, I think, 2 takedowns in that Contender Series fight, but previously on the regional scene, we didn't really see that from her. She is a physical girl, so it's certainly possible that she can level up and add that into her arsenal, but it's just not something that I'm banking on here. And then on the flip side, Denise Gomes, I don't really rate her super highly either, to be honest, but I do think she comes from a Muay Thai striking background. She does have power. I actually think she's the more powerful puncher of the two. So I think a lot of this fight is going to be the kicking attack of Brazil versus the power punches of Denise Gomes. But I think it's a very close fight, and I think in the past, we've seen Gomes at least have the cardio to be able to take over late, take over as the fight goes on. We saw that in her Contender Series fight and across the regional scene as well. So I favor her if the fight gets to round 3. And I also think she's someone that I don't trust to push a grappling pace, but I do think that she's at least capable to land a takedown or two here. And we've seen when Brazil is taken down, you can control her. She does not have much off of her back. I just think it's a close fight where there's going to be value on the underdog at a plus 176 price tag at that time, who is going to be competitive in the striking, probably has more power, and maybe has a path to victory if she decides to wrestle here. So I think it's a close fight, more like 50-50. I'm going to take a shot on the dog in Denise Gomes. Gomes by decision is the official pick. Next fight up, we have Daniel Zellhuber, a minus 130 favorite. The comeback on Lando Vannata is plus 110. And you guys probably recognize Zellhuber because he is infamous for letting the Knights of the Round Table down in his last fight against Trey Ogden. He was the last piece that needed to come through. We had him inside the distance against Trey Ogden, and he not only did not finish Trey Ogden, he lost the fight. Some would say, I would say, he got dog walked by Trey Ogden in that fight, which is a major red flag to me because Zellhuber is a guy who, coming into that fight and on Contender Series, I was pretty impressed with. I think he's long for the division. He's got a powerful kicking attack. He's a solid boxer as well. Defense could be a little bit better, but he seems pretty durable. Good volume, not a horrible defensive grappler either. Able to stuff the initial takedown attempts of most of his opponents. Brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The list goes on. And then you get to his UFC debut against a guy who's not very physical in Trey Ogden, who's not much of a striking threat either. And the dude just has no idea what to do. Like, he can't close distance. His timing's off. He's not throwing as much volume, and he's not connecting when he was throwing volume. And that was the thing where it's like, it was just night and day difference for that fight again, and then the Lucas Almeida fight on Contender. So I think it's hard to really understand what he's going to look like in this fight. But I also think even at his best, Lando Vannata is a difficult matchup for him because it's not easy to outstrike Lando Vannata. He's got a very funky style. He's tough to deal with, much harder to connect with clean than a guy like Trey Ogden. So I think there's a world where Zellhuber struggles with that distance management against Vannata. Vannata's a solid striker. Vannata's also a capable wrestler. He averages over 1.2 takedowns per 15 minutes. He's been more aggressive in mixing in the takedowns recently. I think that's a path to victory for him here. So I slightly lean towards the underdog in Lando Vannata. I just think he's got more ways to win. And if Zellhuber even looks somewhat like he did in his debut, I think Vannata has hindsight minus 200 upside here at least. So we're going with Vannata by decision. That's the official pick. Move over, Golden Boy. It's the Toilet Boy, and he's getting flushed this weekend. Next up, we have another women's strawweight bout as Jillian Robertson comes in as a minus 130 favorite with Pyra Rodriguez on the comeback at plus 110. And this is another bet for me. I backed Pyra Rodriguez on the money line at plus 110 for a unit. I just think this is not a bad matchup for her against Jillian Robertson. At this point, we know what Jillian Robertson brings to the table. She's a fighter similar to Gerald Mearshart in the card last week against Joe Pyfer, where they're extremely dangerous in one area, but if they can't get you into that area, they have basically nothing that you have to be worried about. We've seen time and time again when Jillian Robertson is unable to land those takedowns, and that happens quite often because she's not a good wrestler, and on the feet, she just can't compete on the feet. I know she's added a little bit of tools. She's gotten better with the leg kicks and whatnot, but she's just not winning extended minutes standing. And a lot of times she's just being out physicaled on the feet as well. And now she's going up against a fighter in Pyra Rodriguez, who is pretty physical, who is a good striker. She's going to be doubling her up on volume. I don't think she's easy to take down. And if she does get taken down by Jillian, yeah, there might be a sweaty moment or two. Jillian's very dangerous on top. I'm not taking anything away from her. 8 of her 11 wins have come by submission, and she's always looking to improve her position or to get a finish on the mat. And we love to see that in terms of DraftKings, because if she wins, we know she's likely scoring well. But again, I keep going back to, I don't know if I trust her to be able to get the fight where she needs it. And if she can't on the feet, I think this is Pyra all day. And then even if she does get the fight to where she needs it, if she doesn't capitalize on it in round 1, I think it's going to be even harder to get there in round 2 or potentially round 3. And I think Pyra has the skill set and the striking to take over and be able to win the later rounds. So give me Pyra Rodriguez by decision. And I do think this is a solid fight to target on DraftKings. They're both priced in the mid-range, and I think there's a decent upside for grappling potential on both sides, because Pyra could even land a couple takedowns of her own here, spend time in top position. It would not surprise me whatsoever. So Pyra Rodriguez by decision is the official pick, but I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. And I mentioned earlier on this card with the Bolanos Phillips fight, it's like, what are we doing here? This fight, it might be worse. It's Zach Cummings versus Ed Herman. The combined age of these guys is 80 years old. So I'm not a big fan of watching the olds go at it, especially when it's a bunch of like just sloppy guys, tend to gas out, not a ton of activity, not really a huge KO threat on either side either. So it's Zach Cummings, it's Ed Herman. I'm not inspired by either of these guys. I slightly lean towards Zach Cummings just because he's a little bit younger. He did have a win against DiChirico. I know it was a while ago, and he's been out for like 3 years, but he did have like a back injury, I believe, that where he was like, he came out and said he was like bedridden or something. So that's not great. But I think against Ed Herman, you can't really trust this guy. I mean, he's historically not the best in terms of the cardio. Neither of these guys are going to put a ton of volume out there. And Herman's been submitted a ton of times in his career. And that's one thing Cummings has always been good at. You know, he's not a big volume guy. He does have a little bit of power, but he's always been sneaky good with those submissions. So maybe Herman, if they clinch up against the fence, maybe Herman gets his neck stuck, something like that. I don't know. I could just see it being a sloppy fight, one that turns into a slot fest decision, or maybe Cummings ends up pulling off the submission. Either way, I think I don't really know what to expect with this fight. No chance I'm backing Zach Cummings on the money line at minus 200 or whatever, and I have zero interest in the dog here as well. So it's an easy pass for me in terms of DraftKings. I wouldn't let it make or break your night either way. I'm not going to completely avoid it, but I'm definitely not going to overexpose myself to a fight that I really just don't have a good read on how it's going to play out. And next up in the flyweight division, Matthias Nicolao comes in as a minus 205 favorite with my guy Brandon Raw Dog Royval on the comeback at plus 175. And this is one where I think it's fairly clear that we have one guy in Nicolao who's clearly the more skilled fighter of the two, but we have another guy in Brandon Royval who's naturally going to bring in a lot of variance into basically all of his fights because of the way that he fights. And that's something that I've talked about a lot in the past, is like whenever this dude is priced as a sizable underdog, I almost always have interest, especially on DraftKings, because if he is able to pull off that victory, we know he's going to score very well and you're going to want him. 9 of his 14 wins have come by submission. That's where, when he's at his best, he's very opportunistic in terms of the grappling. The problem is on the feet, he's got basically no defense on the feet. He's going to look to move forward and spam volume, but he gets hit a lot, especially on the counter. And then if he isn't able to pull off the submissions and he's facing better grapplers, well, then they're going to be one step ahead. We saw that in the Pantoja fight, just beat him to every spot, and then he really doesn't have much else for you. If you're able to fend off the early onslaught, and you're a good, solid positional grappler, then he's not the biggest threat. And I think Nicolao is that. He's a very good striker, not going to wow you. He doesn't put a ton of volume out there, doesn't really have a ton of power, but he's very solid, very sharp defensively. I think he's hard to connect clean a lot of times. We saw that in multiple fights in the past here. And then in terms of the grappling, he's a black belt as well. He's very positionally solid. I think I still do have interest in Royval because, like I mentioned, I just think the upside is much, much higher. Whereas Nicolao, it's more of like a, hey, I can beat this guy don't really think he can fit. I mean, I guess he could finish him here. I just don't think a finish is super likely. I think Nicolao is more of like a low scoring decision in terms of this matchup, but you never know, man. Royval brings a lot of variance into his fights. It's not a bad fight to target on DraftKings. Flyweights like to get after it. They fight at a high pace typically, especially a guy like Brandon Royval. But I think the way I'm targeting it is going to be much heavier on the dog, even though I think the most likely outcome is Nicolao winning a decision here. Next fight up, we have Bill Algeo, a minus 200 favorite with TJ Downtown Brown on the comeback at plus 170. And this is one where I think Bill Algeo is going to have multiple advantages here. TJ Brown's going to have an advantage as well, and that's going to come in the wrestling. But I think the cardio, the durability certainly favors the Algeo side. So where Algeo does struggle to get taken down, he's 55% takedown defense in the UFC. And TJ Brown, that's what he is good at, is landing takedowns. He averages multiple takedowns per 15 minutes. That's when he's at his best. He's mixing in the takedowns. Not the most positionally sound grappler, tends to get reversed, doesn't have a great cardio. Durability is a concern as well. He's been knocked down in 2 of his last 4 fights, so I don't really trust the guy whatsoever. I do think he could have early wrestling success here, but Algeo is historically very good at scrambling and working back to his feet. So even though TJ Brown is going to be able to take him down once or twice, I don't really think it's that big of a deal, to be honest, because I think Algeo's a much better striker. I think, again, he's got better cardio, better durability, and he's not a bad grappler himself. Black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I think he can hang in the grappling, and I think he's got multiple advantages, especially as the fight gets extended. So Algeo, by decision, is the official pick. And next fight up, we have Rafa Garcia, minus 250 favorite with Clay Guida on the comeback at plus 210. Clay Guida, absolute legend, 42 years old, and he's still chugging along here, and he's really competitive in most of his fights, which is kind of crazy because I think at 42, which is 10 years from now for me, I'm certainly not going to be fighting in the octagon. I'm not sure I'm going to be competitive in really any sports, period. You know, maybe I'll be one of the older guys in the gym that could just stand in one spot in the corner and shoot threes, catch and shoot, play no defense. Maybe that's my future, but either way, I think Clay Guida at 42 years old doing what he's doing is absolutely amazing. But I do think that at some point it's like, I mean, you could figure this guy out. And it's not that Rafa Garcia is this exceptional fighter, but he is very solid. And when he's at his best, he's a pressure fighter, decent on the feet. His defense needs work. He gets hit a lot, but he lands a lot as well, and he can mix in the takedowns. I'm not sure that that's going to be an avenue for him here because I do think Clay Guida is probably the better wrestler. I think either of these guys might be able to take each other down, but where I see the advantage for Garcia is in the submission grappling. Garcia is a sneaky good submission grappler. He's got a bunch of subs on his record, most of them on the regional scene, but I think Clay Guida, you know, that's always been an issue of his. When he tries to wrestle and land those takedowns, he's very careless with his head position, and Rafa Garcia has a nice guillotine. I've basically envisioned that as how the fight goes. It's competitive on the feet. Clay Guida ducks under, tries to take him down, and Garcia snatches up the neck and submits him. So we're going Garcia by submission. That's the official pick. And kicking off the main card here, we have Chris Gutierrez, a minus 200 favorite with Pedro Munoz on the comeback at plus 170. I feel like I have a pretty good read on Chris Gutierrez. You know, he's very one-dimensional, but that one thing that he's good at, he's very, very good at. And that makes it very difficult for his opponents to deal with, is those leg kicks, the nonstop kicking attack. And I think it makes it very difficult for guys like Pedro Munoz to be able to get inside his range and close distance. Munoz is a good leg kicker himself, but I think for the most part here, he's going to be chasing around Gutierrez, who I expect to be dancing around the outside in the big cage, who I expect to be faster, beating him to the punch as well when Munoz is so focused on the legs. And that's why Gutierrez is so tough to deal with. Now, what Gutierrez struggles with is guys that are going to pressure him, take him down, force him to grapple. That's not what Munoz does historically. He is a good submission grappler, one of the better guillotine chokes in the game, but I just don't think he's really going to even look to do that here. And just at this stage in his career, you know, he's lost 4 of his last 5 fights prior to the no contest against Sean O'Malley. I don't think he looks good at this stage in his career, whereas Gutierrez, I think, is just a difficult guy to deal with in a striking match. And if you're not going to look to grapple, well then yeah, I'm going to favor the better striker, who I think is Gutierrez. So Gutierrez by decision is the official pick. Next fight up in the light heavyweight division, we have Ian Kudalaba, a minus 130 favorite with Tanner Boser on the comeback at plus 110. And this is another bet for me. I bet Tanner Boser on the money line at plus 114. I'm also going to have more bets on this fight. I'm waiting for FanDuel to basically open back up the props because I think Boser by knockout is a good look, and I think Boser round 2 knockout is a good look as well. I'm probably going to be betting both of those depending on what they open the number back up at. But I think, Ian Kudalaba, I mean, at what point are we just going to give up on thinking this guy is any good? Because he's got 1 win over his last 7 bouts. He's historically a gas can. He's a quitter. When he's unable to get that early finish, which is basically almost all of his win equity is a round 1 finish because he really can't win decisions. I know he did against Devin Clark, but I can't bank on him to even have the cardio to win 2 rounds here, especially against a guy who is solid in Tanner Boser. I know he's dropping down a weight class here, so we'll keep an eye on weigh-ins on Friday, make sure everything looks good. And Kudalaba, I mentioned the round 1 finishing upside. That's what he has. Tanner Boser's extremely durable, and he's been difficult to hurt at heavyweight. I don't think Ian Kudalaba poses all that many threats to him. And then on the flip side, Kudalaba's durability is not good, especially as he gasses. He turns into a complete punching bag. We've seen him knocked out multiple times. We know he's going to look for an easy way out. Once the cardio gives up, he looks for the way out. I think Boser is going to take over here after round 1. I think it's very clear. So I like the Boser side. I'm done trusting Ian Kudalaba. So maybe he proves me wrong and that's fine. But I'm definitely going to be heavier on the Tanner Boser side. And this is a solid fight to target on DraftKings as well. And next fight up, we have Dustin Jacoby, a minus 155 favorite with Azamat Murzakanov on the comeback at plus 135. And this is another matchup where it's pretty clear that I favor the round winner in Dustin Jacoby, and I do think he is the better round winner here. We'll start on the Jacoby side. I know he's coming off a split decision loss against Khalil Roundtree. Prior to that, he was on a nice little win streak, and he's just somebody that's very solid. I don't rate him super highly, but he is a solid fighter. He's going to throw decent volume on the feet. He's another leg kicking specialist. He's going to be throwing those leg kicks. He's going to be having success with those leg kicks, and he's just a guy that's difficult to track down. And when you think of that in this matchup against Murzakanov, it's not like he's this world-class striker to begin with, and now we expect him to be chasing around Jacoby in the big cage. I don't see it here. We have a history of this guy not looking as good as he did on the regional scene prior to the PED suspension, and then post Dana White Contender Series. Yes, he's got the knockout skills still. Most of his wins have come by knockout, and the speed of his punches, I think, is faster than what you would expect when looking at the guy's size. So he does still possess that knockout power, but I think he's kind of high-rolled a couple wins here in terms of his finishing ability. I don't think he's a good round winner. I don't think he's really much of a grappling threat at this stage in his career, 37 years old, and I think he's just going to be struggling to maintain distance and cut off the cage against Dustin Jacoby, who I think is just going to be out-voluming him. So maybe Jacoby, gets one punch KO'd here, and then I look stupid, and that's fine, but I think the overwhelming majority of the time, Jacoby wins the decision here, so that's the official pick. And next fight up, we have a banger matchup between Billy Quarantillo and Edson Barboza. Currently, we have Quarantillo a minus 175 favorite with Barboza on the comeback at plus 150. And I do think Quarantillo's the rightful favorite here. I'm not sure it should be quite this wide, but I do think it's at least close. And the reason being is because Edson Barboza, while he is still an excellent striker, that's basically all he has is good striking. And we've seen at times, even against other strikers, his margins are still pretty thin, and his durability is not really there at this stage in his career to be able to just go to war on the feet with guys, because if he's getting knocked down, even if he's not finished, if he's getting knocked down, he's probably going to end up giving up that round here. And it's not to say that he's just going to get knocked down in every fight, but he has been knocked down in each of his last 2 fights. We know he's been knocked out 4 times in his career, so the durability is a concern. I think it has to be a concern. Now, I do think he's going to have success kicking the legs of Billy Quarantillo. He's the guy that doesn't really check the leg kicks all that often, so it's possible that he can compromise Billy's legs early. But outside of that, I think Billy's going to be moving forward. He's going to be pressuring as he typically does. He pushes a high pace on the feet, and he's capable of mixing in the grappling as well. He holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We know he can land takedowns, and I don't mind fading Billy if I know the other guy is durable and is a good grappler, or at least a capable grappler, and is going to push a grappling pace. That Gavin Tucker fight comes to mind where he just ragdolled Billy in terms of the grappling. If you put him on his back, you can control him, defend the submissions, you're fine. But Edson Barbosa is not going to do those things. I don't trust his durability. Even if the striking is competitive, I don't think he's going to be finishing Billy Quarantillo, a guy that's very durable. So I just think Billy is going to take over as the fight goes on. There's probably going to be some sketchy moments early just because he typically eats some shots early in the fight, but I do trust his cardio, I do trust his durability, and I think he's got all the grappling upside in this fight. So give me Billy Quarantillo. I think he gets a late round stoppage in this one. Which brings us to our main event as we have the return of Max Holloway. He's a minus 180 favorite with Arnold Allen on the comeback at plus 155. And this is my biggest bet of the weekend. I like Max Holloway here. I think basically, I think the market's just not reading this correctly because I think Max Holloway has to be like 70% here. I can't get to the current number. I just don't see how you can really in this matchup because we'll start with the Arnold Allen side. Arnold Allen is a very good fighter. I give all credit to him, but he's also a guy that's not really the best minute winner. And I say that because he doesn't put a ton of volume out there. He is a good striker, but he's kind of like that Leon Edwards mold. Not that he's the same fighter as Leon, but a guy who's very good in multiple areas, but he doesn't put a ton of volume out there. He's not going to aggressively look to grapple, and he's not really a huge finishing threat. So if you're not doing any of those things really, then your margins are going to be pretty thin in terms of your round winning ability. And I know he's won plenty of decision, and that speaks to his skill set because he is that good. But once you get to a certain level, those things historically catch up to you. And I know he was able to get the win against Calvin Kattar. He won round one, looked great. I think I would like to see that fight play out again because I still favor Calvin Kattar. I think over 5 rounds, Calvin Kattar, the cardio dynamic is really going to play into his favor there. So I'd love to see that fight play out. And I think we'll probably get a preview of that here, assuming this fight gets into the later rounds because Arnold Allen, I don't think has great cardio. And that fight against Calvin Kattar, he threw a lot of volume in round one. Historically, that was one of his most active round ones. So I think he's going to have to fight like that for 25 minutes to keep pace with Max Holloway. Holloway is historically one of the highest volume strikers in the division, one of the best strikers in the division. I think a lot of the, concern on the Holloway side is that, there's this narrative that people think he's washed or that, he's taken too much damage over the course of his career, blah, blah, blah. And what all that is just that. It's narrative. Because what I see when I see this guy, when this guy's in the cage and in his most recent fights, I still see one of the best strikers in the division. I still see a guy who's extremely difficult to keep pace with in terms of the volume. I still see a guy who's great at defending takedowns. And that's why he's so difficult to deal with because it's like you can't really grapple the guy. He's got good submission grappling, good takedown defense, and on the feet, you have to be able to match the pace. And he's such a good boxer, switching stance, the volume. It's just very tough to deal with. And we've seen really only Volkanovski be able to best him at his game. And Volkanovski is arguably the greatest fighter the UFC's ever had. So I just don't think Arnold Allen, high rolling a couple wins here is now all of a sudden going to be super, super competitive with Max Holloway. I think there has to be, even if there's a little bit of drop off, I think there has to be like a pretty significant drop off for me to get to Arnold Allen now being this super live underdog that is just going to knock out Max Holloway. And if he's not going to by the way, Max Holloway's never been knocked out in his career. And if he's not going to knock him out, well, now you're going to tell me Arnold Allen's going to win a decision against Max Holloway? I mean, you're going to have to prove it to me because I think basically everything favors Max Holloway in this spot. So it's my biggest bet of the weekend. We're on Max Holloway. I'll say by decision is the official pick, but I do kind of think it's a late stoppage. I'm just not confident really either way. I just think it's all Max Holloway. Under's tempting as well, but definitely bigger on the Max Holloway. And I think he's a great play on DraftKings. Historically, one of the better DraftKings plays each and every time out. So give me Holloway. That's the official pick. I think he proves there's levels to this game on Saturday. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It'll have ownership projections, a couple other things as well. It's all completely free at fightnumbers.com. I'll post that in the comments and pin it to the top. As always, I appreciate the support. Do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, tell your friends, click it on Twitter, all that stuff. I definitely appreciate it, guys. Best of luck, and we will see you guys next time.